Hello and welcome. I am Greg Smith, recruiting extraordinaire of Hail Varsity. Today I am joined once again for our Thursday video by staff writer for Hail Varsity, Steve Marik. Steve, how are you this morning, man?
I'm doing good, Greg. It's a really busy time of the year right now, and things are really ramping up in the spring. I love it.
Yeah, there's a lot happening, particularly for you, where you
Yeah.
have we have these couple of times a year, and we talk about this sometimes with Jacob too, where there's like three different sports at one time that you guys cover that are happening all at once. And spring football is that time. So for you right now, for those of you that don't know, for some reason, you haven't been checking out Steve's work. Steve also covers women's basketball and baseball for Hail Varsity, in addition to his duties for football. There's a lot happening right now with spring football ramping up. Now, I will try to throw myself a little bone there. There's a lot happening for me. Recruiting is always going on, right? Nebraska actually has a junior day this coming weekend, so I'll be plenty busy with everything and all of the interviews and stuff like that comes out of that this weekend, since Nebraska will have a practice the same day that junior day event happens as well. But speaking of spring practice, those did get underway this week. On Monday, they started. And with the start of spring practice, we got a round robin whirlwind press availability day with Nebraska football, where we had all the assistant coaches. We obviously had Coach Scott Frost and a handful of players that spoke as well. And we've got a lot of pieces up on hailvarsity.com and more to come about things that stood out to us and various storylines. And that's still where I want to go here with Steve today. And one of the things that I want to kind of dive into are just after the dust has kind of settled and we've seen, we've written some articles and we've kind of gone back and looked through some of this stuff to go into some of the things that stood out to us that kind of made me at least say, maybe we will need to revisit that coming up here later this spring. And I'll go first on this one. And then I think one of the things, and this is a little bit vague, but not, that I've really noticed, and going back through and reading through and watching through, and you can go on stay here on the Hail Varsity YouTube page. We've got videos up from everyone talking as well, is that there wasn't a lot of looking towards last year that came up in these press conferences. And that's something that I've really noted that stood out to me that I think is actually really, really important, especially when it comes to Coach Scott Frost. There was not a lot of, last year this happened and last year that happened, or even prior to that, he's kind of had a penchant for doing that too, going back, even further in the past. I thought that the movement away from any talk about that and saying, hey, the past happened, last year is last year. I think Bill Bush said, the special teams coach, but we've got to move forward and we've got to get better. I thought that was really key. And it's, to me, something I want to keep an eye on to see if that stays throughout spring.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it kind of makes me think of Donovan Raiola's table, because I can't remember who asked him about the center position, but they were saying, last year Cam Jurgens had a great season at center. He fixed his snapping issues. He was pulling all over. He was like looking like a really good center. Like, what have you been telling your potential centers for this upcoming fall? And Donovan honestly didn't know who Cam Jurgens was. they said his name, and Donovan was like, who? Oh, last year's guys. So it's like last year's done and gone, obviously, especially for Donovan Raiola. So yeah, I don't know what that whole situation was like, but yeah, he honestly did not know Cam Jurgens' name at all. And so I thought that was pretty interesting, and kind of goes to what you were saying with moving on. There's no use to looking back last year and what happened last year with all those one score losses. So yeah, it definitely goes along with looking forward and not back.
Yeah, and I think that when I first saw that from I was like, "Ooh, come on!" Was he like taking a shot? Because I wasn't over there. I wasn't at his.
That's what I was thinking too, but I don't think he was.
I don't think he was either.
Yeah.
Like, I actually think, like we're saying, I think that might be a good thing, that there's so much focus on the here and now and kind of moving the line into the future, that I think that's really good. There also wasn't, and there's going to be this kind of natural tension when it comes to talking to all of these, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, where there were 4 new coaches, talking to them about what they hope to accomplish and talking to the players about what it's like to work with these new coaches without throwing the previous coaches under the bus. That's going to be a really fine line to walk. I think that everyone did a really good job of that the first day. you might get a little bit further away from that as we go along with spring football and guys get used to these new coaches. But I don't think that that necessarily serves anybody to bus roll any of those guys either. Like, obviously, they weren't getting the job done to Scott Frost's satisfaction, so they're not here anymore, right? So that's really all you need to say about that. And it needs to focus does need to be on moving forward, because I think, like Mark Whipple said about the quarterbacks on Monday, he got there on Monday, looked around practice, saw the attitude and the skill, and said, we've got more than enough to compete. And I think that that's how a lot of these coaches feel right now. And I think that honing in on what you have now and how you can move into the future is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was fun to listen to all those assistants talk and to get to know them. And yeah, they are a concentrated group. Just, they know what they have to do, and it's a process. I mean, Mark Whipple said that it's going to be a process with the quarterbacks and the offense. He even had a fun anecdote about, kind of walking to the practice field and not knowing where to go himself to stand. So it kind of made clear that, yeah, it was the first day for everyone on Monday, and, they're going to keep getting better and keep getting better.
I always wonder about stuff like that. And I'm glad that actually kind of came up with various assistants on Monday, because you do have that, like, I do think that sometimes people don't give enough credit to, hey, these guys don't know what necessarily to do either. Like, they do have to, and it's so much working on multiple things at the same time. So it's not just figuring out, it can be as simple as figuring out where you need to stand in practice, and as detailed and big as, hey, we've got to install some new principles into an offense, but also have all of us on the same page while we're also trying to get the players on the same page as well. And I think Scott Frost noted that about how much work has to go in behind the scenes with just between the coaching staff so that they can then get that information to the players. I think that that's a real interesting subplot to what's happening in the spring. It's kind of hard to quantify, right? Like, to be able to figure out how that's actually going. But that organizational piece is going to be a big deal. So I guess, Steve, what stood out to you from this week's Pressapalooza that we had?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is an easy one. I think I was with Mark Whipple's table, and then after that, Eric Shenander's. But when I was talking with Whipple, he had a really cool quote here. And it was, like I said, a lot of people have been talking about this, but I think it's really important about kind of talking about the offense and kind of how Mark Whipple is going to want to go about things. His quote was, "It doesn't matter if you have an 0-10 team, you got a best player. So you try to get the best player of the ball. Is it a running back? Maybe. Is it a receiver? Is it a quarterback? So you feature those guys," is what I've always tried to do. So obviously he had one of the best wide receivers in the country last year at Pitt, sophomore by the name of Jordan Addison, kind of a smaller, quicker guy, but 1,000-yard receiver. He won the Biletnikoff Award. Great stuff. Before even Pitt, when Whipple was head coach at UMass, he had Andy Isabella. He fed him the ball over and over and over. So he wants to replicate what he's done at Nebraska, and that is finding a guy to throw the ball to a lot. And Nebraska has plenty of options, I think, but finding that option is going to take time, and it's going to, take this spring and maybe even a little bit into the fall too, when those guys get back from the summer. So that's one thing that really caught my eye, along with, and this kind of goes along with it, Mickey Joseph talking about the inside receivers. And he rattled off 4 names: Trey Palmer, obvious one, but Brody Belt, which was kind of an interesting one, I thought, and then Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, the transfer from New Mexico State. Those 4 guys were, it was really interesting to hear Mickey Joseph talk about, especially for Omar Manning, because that's a big slot, big inside receiver. And you see that sometimes with different offenses across the country, putting big targets in the kind of middle of the field, and it kind of works out that way too. There's a lot of cool different things that you can do with inside receivers, and I think Omar Manning could definitely see some success there. But yeah, I mean, Trey Palmer, watch his highlights, what he did at LSU. He's a really quick, fluid, I think, route runner, and he has a big potential, in my opinion, to be the guy that Whipple was talking about there. So yeah, those are two of the things that really caught my ear.
Yeah, it's interesting to me too about the 2 things that stood out to you, I think, are really related. And I
Yeah.
think that there are things that can really raise the ceiling of the offense, right? And it's going to be fascinating though to see, as much as we've talked about, and I think we'll continue to talk about, that wide receiver has a lot of potential. And if you get everyone to, or if you get the majority of the guys that are going to play, I shouldn't say everyone, to maximize to their potential, you'd have a really, really solid room, right? A beyond solid room in that wide receiver group. But finding the one that's going to stand out above them all to be able to feature and say, if you're an opposing Big Ten defense, Iowa's defensive coordinator, Wisconsin's defensive coordinator, Minnesota's defensive coordinator knows that when they come into a game, they've got to take that guy away. Like, finding that guy, I think, is going to be a little bit of a challenge, because, and part of it, it's not necessarily ability driven. I think it's just a consistency thing. And like, that plays into so much of why Mickey Joseph is here, to bring that out of those guys, because some of those guys have some real ability. Like, you would not be surprised if we fast forward to the end of the season and Xavier Betts is a 50 catch, 1,000-yard, 8 touchdown guy. Like, that would not be like some sort of huge shock. The same thing really with Manning, or even with Palmer. I think that Garcia Castaneda is a guy that I continue to try to slip in there to put the bug in people's ears. And I think that he's really impressing and turning heads. But you wouldn't be surprised if it was not any of them either, right? And so that's the spot that they're in right now, in finding that guy that's going to be the go-to guy. I'm just so fascinated on how that all turns out, and how the competition in that room on a daily basis, you have to bring it to be able to play when we get to the fall, ends up manifesting itself as well.
Yeah, that's right. And another interesting thing that I found Mickey Joseph saying was, he said, we're going to find our best 3 on the field. So that kind of tells me that they're going to be similar in personnel and what they were doing last year. And it's 11 personnel, one running back, 1 tight end. That's a very common personnel set across for offenses across the country. So yeah, it's going to be him, Joseph saying that, finding our best 3 on the field, and then having kind of your top 3, your backup 3, just to keep guys rotating in and then fresh, is going to be really fun to watch and think about, I guess, going forward. But yeah, I think him saying that gives us kind of a glimpse of what at least they're thinking about their base set 11 personnel is going to be next season.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, I mean, that's not a huge shock. I think that's the way that, given the wide receivers that we just named, pick 3 from that kind of top 5 or 6. And then when Travis Vokolek kind of comes back, and you would assume he's holding down a starting tight end spot. We haven't even touched on the running backs, which is going to continue to be an evolving situation. One thing I do want to note as we kind of talk about things that stood out, Scott Frost kind of unsolicited praise for Jock Yant. I think it is one to really kind of pay attention to. And it's not just that he said, oh yeah, he's looking good. He said that he came in great shape, and that he matured over the offseason. So if those are the 2 things that were really kind of holding Yant back, and he starts to turn the corner in both of those respects and stays on the right track, you could be looking at something there, which would make for a potentially interesting storyline, because it's not like he doesn't have the talent. You saw that in short spurts last year. It's about putting it all together. There's just so many question marks on the offense that could go one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with Yant, there is not a bigger, if everything works out with one player, there's not a bigger fan favorite than Jacques Yant.
Yeah, he would be such a big, he would.
I mean, the nicknames that everybody comes up with, the fact that he's like a 240-pound running back, the fact that he's really good. If he could put everything together on and off the field, if he could go the correct way on like a fake handoff, if he could not trip at the 1-yard line, at Minnesota. I mean, everything is set up for that kid to be on top of the world here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And it'd be really fun if he could put it all together. And yeah, like you said, the question marks are everywhere. And I keep going to the offensive line. You can have all the talent in the world, but man, like, it's the Big Ten. It's a conference full of big men on the defensive line and on the offensive line. It's just really, really important to shore up and kind of fix the issues on the offensive line, because, a lot of that talent that you brought to Lincoln, it's not going to matter if you can't block everyone. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as we continue to progress through spring, the thing that we'll continue to talk about and probably through the fall into when the games start is how are the lines of scrimmage looking for Nebraska? We know that the offensive line has a couple of key guys that figure to start banged up right now. They're trying to find a center. The defensive line has guys banged up, and they need to find that rotation. They probably need to add a guy or two from the transfer portal to be able to get after the quarterback as well. Like those will continue to be big storylines. But those are just a few of the things that really stood out to us this first week. There'll be plenty more coverage to come on hailvarsity.com. We'll be back here again next week talking more Nebraska football, as we'll have plenty more things to dive into after the team has a week of practice. Make sure you guys are still tuning in to hailvarsity.com. We will catch you next week.